Okay, Chapter 6 deals with controls on the use of land. We talked about this a little bit earlier in the lectures last week, how there were private controls of land, public controls of land. Now we're going to get more in depth about them, and most specifically more in depth about the public ones. We will talk about private land use controls, but we've pretty much covered the extent of those by talking about restrictive covenants before. Okay, we really want to get in depth in this chapter in some of the public land use controls and some of the terminology that you might need to know, that you might see on the test. All right, so remember I said to you that the only difference between a public land use control and a private land use control is who enforces it, right? So who enforces private land use controls? Entities, people, other landowners in the same subdivision, right? Now remember, don't think of a subdivision as a pretty neighborhood with a bunch of houses in it. A subdivision is anytime land is what?
Subdivided.
Divided. Anytime a piece of land is divided, we've created a subdivision. So if there were only two pieces of land that we divided, I mean we divided one piece into two, then if there are restrictive covenants, then it's up to the one owner to enforce those on the other. Does that make sense? Okay. Who enforces public land use controls? The government does. Absolutely. So we're going to talk about the different types of public land use controls and how they work. Now this is a use of what they call police power. Police power is the right of the government to control certain things about private life, including how you use your land. All right? The first of these that we want to focus on is zoning. It's in your book on page 108, 109. Zoning and zoning ordinances are powers that are given to every city, municipality, and county in this state. The powers come from the General Assembly, the state legislature. They are granted to the municipalities, the counties, the towns, cities, to control the use of land within their boundaries. Now, every county or city that's going to have zoning ordinances has to come up with what we call a master plan. They have to create this master plan. In other words, a perfect picture of what their city or county or town would look like if everybody complied with the rules. If every piece of property was used in every area for what they said it should be used for in that area, this is what we're looking for. This is what our goal is. Now, these are the things that the master plan has to outline. What are we looking for? Land use. What is the land in each area going to be used for? Where are the public facilities going to be? Things like fire stations, police stations, city hall, courthouses. Circulation. What do we mean when we say circulation? Flow of traffic. This is somewhere where the planners in Raleigh have failed miserably. Actually, it's pretty hard to keep up with the influx of people. So give them a little bit of a break. If you've ever been to Greenville, you will believe that people in Raleigh know exactly what they're doing. Greenville has the worst traffic for a small-ish city I've ever seen in my life. If you go down Arlington Boulevard, it'll take you 3 hours to go 2 miles in the afternoon. It's unreal. It's unreal, the traffic in Greenville. I've never seen anything like it. So we got to create a plan for circulation of traffic, a plan to conserve natural resources, and a plan for noise abatement, which basically means placing loud and noisy things away from residential developments, for example. That's what the master plan has to provide for. Now, let's talk about the zoning ordinances themselves. And ordinances are just another word for rules or laws. Okay? So these zoning ordinances, and they break down the property into uses that are residential, commercial, industrial, agricultural. Now, before I get into this, I want to explain to you the philosophy of zoning. Okay? The philosophy of zoning is very simple. They want 100% compliance with the zoning rules. The goal is always to have 100% compliance with the zoning rules. They will get, eventually, 100% compliance with the zoning rules. Now, for the next half hour, 45 minutes, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about exceptions to the zoning rules and how you can do something different than what the rules say you can do. But I want you to understand, just like when we had this discussion way back when we talked about fee simple absolute, and then we went into life estates and fee simple to feasible, I said we're not going to talk about fee simple absolute very much, but that's what happens what? 99.99% of the time, right? I'm telling you before we get into zoning that all this stuff we're about to talk about, all these exceptions, are very rare. And even if they do exist, the goal is to get them to what? Comply, which means the exceptions to go away, right? The goal of zoning is always 100% compliance. The city, the municipality, the county will do everything they possibly can to effect 100% compliance with their zoning rules. Has everybody got that? All right. So, we said that zoning has the purpose of regulating and controlling the use of the land and the structures within the zone. There is no statewide zoning standard. This is completely local in nature. As a matter of fact, the state will not get involved in zoning disputes in most cases. This is completely local. Okay? We need to talk about extraterritorial jurisdictions. Because these are local laws, you would think they apply where? Localities, right? Within their borders. So where would Raleigh's zoning ordinances apply? If you're within the city limits of what? Of Raleigh. Except the state says that ain't enough. The state gives them some extra. We call that extra the extraterritorial jurisdiction. And so here's what's happening here, folks. By the way, welcome to the free country that we live in. What's happening here are these are properties that are not located in these municipalities. They do not have the benefit of any of the services offered by these municipalities. They do not vote in the local elections of these municipalities. But they are bound by the rules of land use of said municipality. So these people don't live in Raleigh. If their house catches on fire, it is not going to be the Raleigh Fire Department that comes to put it out. They'll have to wait for some volunteer fire department from 40 miles away in the country to come do that. If their house gets broken into and there's a Raleigh policeman that's 3 minutes away, they will have to wait for a Wake County Sheriff's deputy that's 40 minutes away to come and assist them at their house. But if they want to operate a home business and Raleigh zoning says you can't do it, guess whose rules they have to follow? Raleigh's. That is what an extraterritorial jurisdiction is. It's property located outside of the boundary. But they still have to follow the rule. Now, these extraterritorial zones come in 3 sizes: 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles. And those, what dictates that size is population. These numbers have not been updated in a very long time. You want to know what the minimum population is for the biggest extraterritorial jurisdiction, which is 3 miles all the way around your borders? If you have 25,000 people. Good luck finding a city in central North Carolina that doesn't have at least 25,000 people. So for the most part, what size are these jurisdictions going to be? 3 miles. Most of them are 3 miles. You think about that now. You got to leave Raleigh, and you drive for 3 more miles before you reach a property that's not under Raleigh's zoning control. That's a long way, isn't it? If you think about it. So that's what an extraterritorial jurisdiction is. You're still bound by their zoning rules.
But that's only if there's not like another town right there.
Well, if you happen to be in another town.
Like Wake Forest.
Well, and that right there, you just brought up the reason that many municipalities expand. They try to beat each other. Because what happens is their extraterritorial jurisdictions overlap. And then the towns fight over who's got control. Raleigh and Cary were notorious for doing this. And now there is no border area between Raleigh and Cary. They've both expanded until they met each other, right? Well, a lot of what governed that, a lot of what forced their hand in doing that is they were sick of fighting over who controlled what. So they had this race to expand and meet in the middle.
Since we moved to Roseville like 3 years ago, they took and moved their planning district out.
Yes.
So it's like right up to Wake Forest now.
Yes.
It's like all the way into Heritage.
Right. They fight for control. That's what they do. That's what municipalities do. They fight for control. They want to control more land in greater areas. Okay? So, we say that they must not violate property owners' rights. I'll leave it up to you whether they do it. In some cases, that's up for you to decide. But that's what the law says. They're not supposed to violate property owners' rights. The purpose of this is to preserve the highest quality of life for the greatest number of people. That's what the idea is behind zoning. Okay? We as brokers, here's what our responsibility is. Disclosing the zoning is hugely important for us. Okay? We are supposed to disclose to people what the allowed uses are of a particular piece of property if we're listing that property for sale. Okay? And especially if you have a client, like a buyer, who says, I want to do this with that property. Wouldn't you think it'd be your responsibility to go look up and see if that thing that they just said can be done on that property? Absolutely. It absolutely is. So we must disclose the zoning. Okay? So we're going to talk about some zoning terminologies here. Some things that you need to know for real life, but primarily for your test-taking purposes. Some terminology that's going to come up. The first one, and it's on page 111. It's called a legal non-conforming use. Now, this is one of those ones that when you read it, you think, okay, this zoning thing's not so bad. This is another word for this is called the grandfather clause. How many of you ever heard something be grandfathered in? What does that mean when we say something is grandfathered in? It's not legal now, but it was then, so you're still okay, right? Pretty much, isn't that what the grandfather clause is? You've been doing it for so long, it's all right if you keep doing it. That's what it is. And that's sort of what a legal non-conforming use is. Well, the word non-conforming is in there. What does that mean?
No longer in alliance with the zoning for that neighborhood.
It means that the thing that this property is being used for does not match up with what the zoning says is allowed here, right? And then the first word is legal. So put those two words together. It's legal, but it doesn't match up with the zoning. And tell me what a legal non-conforming use is. It means it's grandfathered in. It means they were doing it before what? Before the zoning came along and said they couldn't do it, so they get to continue to do what? Do it. Sounds super fair. And the law actually says this is what we call a matter of right. You don't have to ask for a legal non-conforming use. If you are doing it before the law changes, you can continue to do it. But now let me back up. What was the first thing I said about zoning? The goal is what? 100% compliance. Well, that does not sound like this, does it? You'd never get 100% compliance if you just let people keep doing it because they've always been doing it. Well, they do let people keep doing it who've always been doing it. But what they say to you, and it's a very small thing, is you can't improve this non-conforming use. You have to keep it the same. Let me give you an example of what they mean by you can't improve this non-conforming use. Well, if you're a smart business owner, let's say you built yourself a little bar out in the country. Well, why'd you build it in the country in the first place?
Because there wasn't another one around.
Well, there wasn't no one around. Why else might you have built it in the country? Land was cheap. Why else might you have not built it in the country? Clearly, y'all have not been to Eastern North Carolina where they have... Say that again. Well, there might be some laws, but there's not as many, right? And in many municipalities in North Carolina, folks, even to this day, guess what you cannot have?
Bar.
Shocking as it may be, a bar. There are dry counties in this state still, folks, where you can't buy a drink of liquor. Look it up. They're still there. You don't live there. I just said look it up. Don't go there. Okay? Who lives there? People who can't get away. That's who lives there. That's it. That's it. But there are towns where you look at the zoning and say, okay, I want to open a bar. What zone can I open a bar in? And they hand you a blank piece of paper. That zone right there. And it's been that way for years. So what people do? They went out and they bought themselves an acre of land 2, 3, 4, 5 miles outside of town, and they built a bar. Because just because the municipality said you couldn't do it doesn't mean people didn't want to do what? Drink, right? So you went out and you built yourself a bar out in the county where there's no rules that said you couldn't build a bar. Well, it happened over time. The city did what? Expanded. Now you find yourself in that extraterritorial jurisdiction. It hasn't expanded enough that you're actually in the city. You're still in the country. But now you find yourself in that extraterritorial jurisdiction. So can you continue to use it as a bar?
Yeah.
Yes, as a what? One of these things. Illegal, non-conforming use, right? But the rule says you can't improve that non-conforming use. So here we go. Tornado comes along, blows your building down, right? I got insurance, no problem. Insurance pays me, right? I get ready to go get permits to build my bar back. What do they say to me? Well, you can build a building back, but you can't use it as a bar. Well, why not? It's always been a bar. No, what was a bar is gone. Whatever you put back there now will be a new use. You can't improve a legal non-conforming use. Well, let's say that's an extreme one, right? I mean, how often does a tornado come and blow the building down? Here's another example. They come along to you, and you've always had a gravel parking lot, right? You're out in the country. Who the hell cares about a paved parking lot? You've always had a gravel parking lot. And they come along to you, and they say to you that, in the city extraterritorial jurisdiction, we don't allow gravel parking lots. They're unsafe. It's a safety concern. And you say, no problem, I'll get it paved. You say, well, I'm sorry, we can't issue you a permit to pave your parking lot because that would be improving a legal non-conforming use. So you look at them and you say, well, wait a minute, you're telling me I got to pave the parking lot to be safe, but you're telling me I can't pave the parking lot. How am I going to keep operating? I say, I don't know. What did I say the goal was? And they're going to get it. So here's the thing, folks. If you ever end up representing a client who's looking at purchasing a business that operates as a legal non-conforming use, should you not really strongly suggest to them that they look into what is going to be involved in continuing to operate this business under that legal non-conforming use?
Yes.
Right? It's going to be tough. They're going to make it tough because they always want compliance. Does everybody follow that? Are you good on what a legal non-conforming use is? Okay? There's going to be all kind of rules. You can't discontinue the use for a certain number of days. In some places, that's 30 days. I've seen places that closed down for renovations and didn't get reopened in time. They told them they couldn't reopen anymore because the use had been discontinued for more than 30 days. There are municipalities in North Carolina that say you can't sell a legal non-conforming use. There are places in North Carolina that say you can't transfer title to a legal non-conforming use. That essentially makes it a life estate, doesn't it? Because if you can't transfer title, what happens when you die? The use goes away, right? They will get 100% compliance with these legal non-conforming uses because they'll live longer than you will. They'll outlast you. I promise. Okay? So don't look at this thing and think of it as some permanent solution. It's basically designed as a way to change the zoning around you without a court saying you can't do that. Okay? But eventually, they'll catch it. They'll get caught up with you, and that use will go away. And once it's gone forever. And now you've got to conform. Does everybody follow that? Right? So, key to a legal non-conforming use is the use started before or after the zoning was in place? Before. Now, an illegal use is a use that started happening before or after the zoning took effect? After. The only difference between a legal non-conforming use and an illegal use is when it started. Now here's the key thing and what you should look for, test questions about illegal uses. I don't care how long you've been doing it. If it was illegal when you started it, it's still what now? Illegal. Here's the kind of test question they might give you. Carlos operates a home health business from the same small house in downtown Mebane where he's operated that business for the last 40 years. He sells the business to Hunter, who continues to operate it as a home health business for the next 5 years. Upon Hunter's sale of the property to Diane, Diane wishes to continue to operate a home health business. The property is located in a zone where it has been zoned strictly residential for the last 50 years. What is the current legal status of Diane's use as a home health care business?
Illegal.
Illegal. Why? Because the zoning started when? 50 years ago. And it said Carlos has been using it for how long? 40. And then Hunter used it for that purpose how long? 45. For 5, so we're at 45 now, right? And Diane buys the thing. So what happened first, the zoning or the use? The zoning, and if the use is illegal then, it's illegal now, right? Now, here's what you have to understand about that. Can they choose to let it continue? Absolutely. But Diane would have to buy that thing knowing that that use could stop at when? Anytime.
So does that make it, so if somebody was your client and they were buying something that's an illegal use, and for instance, because I'm from the country too, like somebody has a garage shop built up behind their house, and they fix cars. So they built a big old like 3-4 bay garage shop up on their land.
Probably didn't get any permits, probably didn't do anything. Zoning says they can't do it, right? Yep.
Yeah, it's residential.
Right.
So if you bought that, and you bought that garage thinking you were going to run a car business.
How lucky do you feel today? That's what it boils down to. And that's exactly what you should be explaining to the client in writing on an email. You should say, listen, I am happy to represent you in this transaction, but you should understand that based on my research, the zoning has been in place for this many years. It says you cannot operate this as a garage. Now, obviously, it's being operated as a garage. If you choose to continue with the purchase, you can choose to operate it that way if you want to, but you would be doing so in violation of the zoning ordinance. And you need to understand that they could put a stop to that at any time.
So how would it appraise that?
It wouldn't.
The shop building wouldn't appraise?
No.
I mean, like, you got the house, so you know the house and the land are going to appraise for something like a sale.
They'd value it. The first thing an appraiser looks for is highest and best use. And highest and best use is going to be as a residential property. And that's exactly how they would value it.
And so you wouldn't get any value for this.
Most likely not. Maybe as a garage, a 3-car garage.
Big garage.
Right. Okay, it's a good question. Does everybody kind of understand how that would work? And you'd have to really caution that client against doing that thing to cover yourself. Because here's what inevitably happens, folks. I know you love your clients. You think you're going to love them. And I do love mine. But as soon as the crap hits the fan, the first place they want to blame is who? Right back on you. Because God forbid it was their fault. I mean, you can stand right there and tell them, look, the house has termites. The termites need to be treated. You got wood rot going on right here. You can see through the floor joists. Yeah, but that kitchen is beautiful. Do you see the granite countertops and the blah, blah, blah? Yeah, it's going to fall down. Do you understand that? It's falling down. And then 3 years later, when it's falling down, they come back and, you sold me a bad house.
You didn't tell me.
You didn't tell me. Yes, I did. See, here's his email. I told you. I emailed you the termite inspection and said, I recommend that you either have the seller fix all this or you cancel the transaction. And you bought it anyway because you like the countertops.
Which are now on the ground.
Which are now sitting on the floor because the termites have eaten the cabinets because they got tired of the floors, which were already gone. Right? But people will do things like that. I had an agent who's an instructor who called me last week and she was laughing and she said, you'll never believe it. Client filed a lawsuit against her.
She was laughing.
She was laughing because she said it's the most frivolous thing I've ever seen in my life. Client filed a lawsuit against her because they bought a house that had a wood-burning fireplace that had been converted to gas logs. Now, it said in the listing, converted to gas logs because the chimney is inoperable. The people came in, took the gas logs out, started a fire in the fireplace. Said fire continued up and out the chimney and set the chimney on fire. And they wanted to sue her because the chimney caught on fire. She pulled out a list and she said, it's right there. But they will sue you for it. So you better back yourself up on stuff like that. So if you have, and that's my point about all this zoning stuff. If you have clients who have weird requests, you better stop and go check the zoning. You know, if you're showing them houses and they tell you, I want to buy it to live in it, do you need to go do research on the zoning? No. But if you're showing them houses and they tell you, I want to operate a beauty salon out of the basement, do you need to go do some research and see if a home business like that is allowed? Absolutely. Absolutely. And do it in writing so you have some backup. Okay? Are we good on the difference between legal non-conforming and illegal use? The timing is key here, right? All right. Let's talk about Let's talk about conditional use permits, which are on page 111. Okay? A conditional use permit, and then we'll talk about variances. Conditional use permits are probably the hardest to understand because these are things that are not allowed anywhere. If you pull up a zoning district, it's a map, right? You go pull up one in Raleigh, and it'll be a big map of Raleigh, and it's got 40 different color-coded areas. And then there's a key on the side that says if it's this color, it's this zone. Maybe it's R10. And so you go look up what R10 is, and that's residential zones with maximum density of 10 units per acre, right? That's what R10 equates to. Or C4, which is commercial use 4, and that might be mixed use retail and restaurant, you know, and you go look and then you pull up the page for C4, and it tells you these are the allowed uses, right? And these are the not allowed uses. And then there'll be a chart in the middle of that page that says conditional uses. Here's what conditional means. Maybe. You might be allowed to do it. Here's the thing. If you pull up your zoning chart and the thing you want to do is in the allowed uses, do you need to ask for permission any further? No, because it's clearly allowed. If it's in the not allowed uses, do you need to bother asking for permission? No, because it clearly ain't allowed. But if it's in that middle column that says conditional uses, what do you have to do if you want to figure out, can I do this thing with this property? You got to apply. You got to ask for permission. Shockingly, here's the first thing that's going to be a conditional use. Never an allowed use. You will not find this thing that I'm about to say as an allowed use in any zone in the city of Raleigh. A church. Churches are not allowed uses in any zone in the city of Raleigh. Now, are there churches in Raleigh? Yes. Why would they not want a church to be an allowed use? Well, let me preface it by saying, if it's an allowed use, how many of them can you put in a particular area? Infinite number, as many as you want, right? Because it's allowed. That means it's allowed. You don't have to ask for permission. So why might churches be a conditional use? Say that again. They don't pay taxes. They don't pay taxes. Do we want whole swaths of a city where none of the property owners pay property taxes? No, not if you're running the show and paying the bills, right? Another good reason. What if we have 5 churches all on the same street? What's going to happen on that day that they all meet at the same time? Traffic. It's going to be a nightmare, right? It would also be kind of hard to police those kinds of areas because police depend on like normal people to report things, right? If you got 14 churches in a row, nobody's there 6 days out of the week, right? Something happens, the thing catches on fire, blows up, nobody knows it because nobody's nearby, right? So it's not a good idea to have those kinds of facilities be allowed because you might get too many of them. So that's what a conditional use is for. It's saying, yes, it's okay to have this thing in this area, but we want to control the number of them, so you have to ask us for permission on a case-by-case basis.
So is it like where I stay on Highway 70, in Clayton, there's like 5 churches back to back on that one road, like in that one area.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why they don't allow that in the city, because
They don't want that. They don't want that situation to develop. Right.
churches doing it. I just couldn't understand it. But
Right.
back to back.
And there are other things that would be conditional uses, but I think that's a good example because you can kind of understand once you talk about it a little bit why you wouldn't want an unlimited number of houses of worship. And that's what I should use, by the way, when I start teaching fair housing. Church isn't a word you shouldn't use because it has a connotation of a certain religion, which is a bad thing in fair housing rules. So see, I need to discipline myself and say houses of worship. Okay. Is everybody okay on the conditional use? Good. Now let's talk about the thing that never ever happens. This is like a unicorn wandering through the forest, right? The variance. People read about this and they go, "Oh, you just ask for permission and they'll let you do whatever you want." No, they will not let you do whatever you want. And when I talk about variances, people inevitably think of, my property's zoned residential, but God, I could make so much money if I put a gas station here. I'm going to ask them for a variance and let me use my property as commercial. No, that is not what we're talking about with variances. Here is so a variance, if you haven't already figured it out, is asking for permission to do what? Do something different than what it's zoned for. Here is the burden you have to prove when you're asking for a variance. I can't do anything with it. There's nothing. If I followed all the rules, it literally would be worth zero because there's so many rules attached to it right now based on your rules that I can't do anything with this piece of property. So let me show you what I mean by a situation where you couldn't do anything with a piece of property. Let's say we have a little subdivision. We've got a highway down here. We've got a subdivision that comes in like this. That's a little cul-de-sac. And we've got several properties in that cul-de-sac. Lot 1, 2, 3, and 4. What do we call this thing, by the way?
Subdivision.
Yeah, what do we call that thing I'm drawing?
Plat.
Plat map. That's a plat map. Map of the subdivision of a plat map. All right, and it's a cute subdivision because we got a little stream going through the back here. Okay? Everybody likes water, right? So, we got some zoning ordinances in place. Number 1 is zone residential, so we can only use it for residential use, not so bad. Okay? Number 2 is every property in this particular town has a 15-foot side border. In other words, you cannot build within 15 feet of your side property line. So imagine there's a little dotted line on the side border of every one of these properties. You can't build within that border. Very common ordinance. 10 feet, 15 feet. Very common. Okay? Furthermore, this town has an ordinance that says you can't build within 30 feet of a public right-of-way. What does that mean, a public right-of-way? What is that?
Road.
A road. This cul-de-sac a road? Yeah. So you can't build within 30 feet of a public right-of-way. And last but not least, this town has an ordinance designed to protect natural resources. Remember, that's one of those things the master plan is supposed to provide for. It says you cannot build anything within 50 feet of a naturally flowing body of water. Look at lot number 2. Where can I build something? Nowhere. So if I follow all of the zoning ordinances, what can I do with that piece of property? Absolutely nothing. Right? It's just there. It's just wasted. That's the kind of case you have to make to get a variance. Now, does that mean they will give them a variance to build a gas station there? What kind of variance are they going to grant? What are they going to vary?
The setbacks.
The setback requirements. They're gonna give them a variance, in this case, of the setback requirements. Maybe they say, okay, for your lot, instead of it being 50 feet within the water, it's 30 feet, and instead of being 30 feet within the public right-of-way, it's 20 feet. So they move the 10 feet closer to the road and 20 feet closer to the stream to give them. Now, are they gonna give them as big of a space as they want to build the thing? No, they're gonna give them the bare minimum.
Gotta walk out the back door and follow the door.
Well, no, that's what they want to do, because then they can build a bigger house, right? What they're going to say is, no, you can put a 1,100 square foot house here when they want to build 2,000. Does that make sense for everybody? That'd be a good case for a variance, because you cannot do anything with the property reasonably if you followed all the rules. Okay? So we're not talking about big changes there with variances. Okay? The variance would be how you prevent something from being illegal use, right? And illegal use is when you do it in spite of the rules. The variance is when you're asking them to change the rules so your use won't be illegal. Okay? As far as the rest of this terminology, overlay districts, historic preservation, aesthetic zoning, it's all the same thing. Basically, it's like an additional requirement. The name overlay comes from back in the days when they actually used to use big overhead projectors. Does anybody remember those? The ones, the big glass thing with a light in it and arms and shining on the wall behind you. Well, what they used to do is in these zoning meetings, they'd put a big map of this town on the overhead projector, and then they would have like a red blob that they would lay over the map. And that blob would be what we call an aesthetic zone or a historic zone. We have them in Raleigh, like historic Oakwood is a historic zone. It's zoned R3, which means residential properties, maximum density of 3 per acre, right? That's what it's zoned. But there's additional restrictions placed on that because it's deemed to be historic. Does that make sense? So it has more restrictions than a normal R3 zone would have. You got to look up R3 first, find out what the restrictions are there, and then you got to look at what the additional restrictions are for the historic zone. So it overlays those. It's an addition to. Does that make sense? That's what overlaid historic aesthetic zoning is. Okay? And spot zoning is a bad thing. Spot zoning is, you know it when you see it, it probably means somebody got bribed somewhere along the way on a zoning or planning board. A spot zoning is one lot in the middle of 1,000 residential lots that's all of a sudden zoned commercial and they put a gas station there. You just look at it and you're like, that don't make sense. Somebody got paid. That's the one time that the state will step in and a judge can step in and overturn a zoning decision if it's found to be spot zoning. That's when your brother is on the board of commissioners.
So, like, Capitol and Perry Creek, like they built a CarMax, this is like it's out of place.
Well, but that's all zoned commercial.
Oh, really?
So that's all, I mean, that whole area is zoned for that purpose. Yep, sure is. We would be looking at like one lot. It's just zoned differently than everything around it. Good thought. Okay? Any questions on this terminology here? We good on that? All right. Subdivision regulations. This is another one they're going to test you on pretty heavily. So you need to make sure you spend some time studying the rules about subdividing land. Okay? What did I say a subdivision consists of? Anytime you do what? Divide into more than one piece. One piece into 2 or more is a subdivision. Okay? So you need to know the process for creating a subdivision. Specifically, you need to know what's up here on the screen. Cities and counties have their own rules, but the rules are all basically the same. That third bullet point down is probably the most important point in the development of a subdivision. Okay? What does it say has to be recorded? What kind of plat? That word is important. Preliminary. Preliminary plat map has to be approved and recorded. What does the word preliminary mean?
Before you start building.
Before you start building stuff, right? Well, this is why that point in time is very important. This class gives you a license to do what? Sell real estate. We can't do our job until the preliminary plat map has been recorded. So what does that mean? What cannot happen until the preliminary plat map has been recorded? You can't sell these lots. Now tell me what the definition of selling is, because that's the important thing. No. Transferring title is closing. That ain't selling. Selling is writing a contract. You need to learn that. Selling, as a term, means writing a contract. Putting it under contract is selling it.
When you list them,
I'm sorry?
so you can actually list.
You can list them for sale prior to the plat map being recorded.
What is it, reserve your lot or whatever? Can they reserve their lot? Like
No, because that's putting them under contract. Reserving is a contract, right? So can you list them for sale? Sure. You can list the lots for sale. Can you actually write a contract on them? No. Once the preliminary plat map is recorded, you can quote unquote sell, which means what? What does sell mean? Put it under contract. Now, what's the most important time for us though? When we get paid. That's the most important time for me. When do we get paid? When we put it under contract? When it closes. So, that word preliminary becomes very important now. We've got to at some point go from preliminary plat map to final plat map. What do you think cannot happen before we go to a final plat map? Closing. We can't close. We can sell with a preliminary plat map, meaning we can put it under contract. But we can't transfer title until we have what kind of a plat map? A final plat map. And so what's the difference between a preliminary and a final? Tell me.
Final is already, the preliminary is basically our plan.
That's a plan.
Yeah.
What's a final?
Final is actually, it's there, it's in stone, this is how it's gonna be.
We can't do what? Can't change it. So here's the point of this thing, folks. If I come in and I write a contract to buy lot number 4, they've got a preliminary plat map, right? I write my contract, I'm going to buy lot number 4. I may or may not be also buying a house, but I'm buying for sure lot number 4. At some point during the construction process, before they file a final plat map, they make a change over here on lot number 1. Did it affect me?
No.
No, but it's a subdivision.
I might not think it affected me. But what did I contract to buy? I contracted to buy lot number 4 on plat map number blah, 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 blah. But what did they do? They changed what? The plat. So the plat that my contract refers to does not exist any longer. Because they did what? They changed it. So, here's a test question for you. I've walked you right through it. I'm going to walk you up to the test question. Travis writes a purchase contract on a piece of property in a subdivision that has a preliminarily approved plat map. Prior to closing, the developer makes a change on a lot that has no impact on Travis's lot purchase. He placed a $50,000 non-refundable deposit for building the home. The home is completed. It's time to close. What's the legal status of this contract? Don't use those words because we haven't talked about them yet. Tell me in, I'm sorry?
They don't have a contract.
He can do what?
He can get his money back.
He can walk away. I said it was non-refundable though. Does that matter?
Yeah, 'cause
No. It doesn't matter. I can say it's non-refundable till I'm blue in the face. Because the thing I contracted to buy, they didn't deliver, folks. I don't care how much it looks like the house I wrote the contract for. I don't care how much my lot did not change. If I write a contract at this preliminary stage and they make any change on that plat map prior to the time we go to closing, what can I do as a buyer?
Yeah.
Walk away and get what? All my money back. All my money back. Now, y'all remember from a few nights ago when I said developers don't go in and approve big, huge plat maps with hundreds of houses on them at a time, that they keep it small and do it in phases? Now does it make sense why they do it that way?
Yeah.
The other thing is, why does it make sense they do it that way? Remember, they can't do what until they get a final plat map. They can't actually close, right? They can't actually close. So essentially, if they say they did 5 streets and 100 lots all on one plat map, they'd have to finalize all 5 streets and all 100 lots before they could close on the first one. They don't want to do that, right? So how many plat maps is a big 100-house subdivision going to be? A lot.
When you just gave that example about the getting refunded, was that after it's finalized or before? That was during the planning preliminary.
Was it after it's finalized or before? I said it's time to close. So if it's time to close, what do they have to do?
Finalized.
They've had to finalize it.
So they were getting ready to.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So here's the thing. It doesn't matter what our contract is gone the minute they make a change on that plat map. Now, is the developer going to advertise that to you as a buyer?
No.
No. Here's what they're going to do. They're going to send you an email. And it's going to say, hey, Carlos, it's good to talk to you. I haven't seen you. Meanwhile, I'm the agent who represents the seller in this case, right? I'm that on-site sale, that nice guy that helped you pick out your countertops. I'm going to send you an email that says, hey, Carlos, just a quick note. I've attached a map to this email, and we just need a quick set of initials from you on it. They had to make a change over on lot 20. It didn't impact you at all. Can you initial and date that map for me? What are they getting his approval on?
The change.
The change. So now what's in force again? The contract. Now, are they going to tell you, hey, by the way, this gives you the right to walk away and get all your money back? No. Lesson right there. Get a damn buyer's agent. Because we know that stuff. Even if you're buying new construction, you need a buyer's agent. Anybody who buys a house without a buyer's agent is dumb. I'm sorry if you did it. You were dumb when you did it. You won't ever make that mistake again. It's just the truth. You shouldn't do it. Because that little thing right there could save you so much time, frustration, energy, money. Hell, you could use that to renegotiate the deal right there. You could say, oh, yeah, I'll initial it, but you know that fence that I wanted that you wouldn't put up? You're going to put it up now. Or, that's fine, you can just cut me a check back for my $50,000 and you can go sell this house that I customized with pink toilets to somebody else. Right? But see, a good buyer's agent knows that kind of stuff. Does that make sense? Y'all follow me on that process, right? So we can do what after we got the preliminary plat map?
Close contract. Not preliminary.
Preliminary. What can we do after we got a preliminary plat map?
Yeah.
List and sell, which means write a contract, right? What do we have to do before we can actually close, transfer title? We got a final plat map. Final plat map. Those are the subdivision rules. You should know those. You're going to be tested on that process. I promise you will. Okay? Another big important piece of the subdivision rules, street disclosures. And this is one that everybody misses on the test too, because it seems like such a simple thing. They're going to give it to you in a not simple way. Okay? Streets come in 2 variations, public and private. We just talked about public and private land use restrictions, right? Who maintains public streets? The government, right? Some form of city, state, county, somebody other than me, right? Who maintains private streets?
You.
The homeowners, the property owners, right? In the subdivision. Do you want to be in a subdivision where you have private street maintenance in most cases?
No.
No, it is ungodly expensive.
Yeah.
private street maintenance is ungodly. Because I'll give you an example. Governor's Club, Chapel Hill. One of the most, and you'll show it at some point in your career once you get a license. Now, you have to rent air to go in there and show it because they don't let you breathe air in over there. It's a gated community. You have to stop at the gate. You have to show them your license. You have to show them what houses you have appointments to show. And you have to tell them how long you're going to be in there to show it. Because they send their little patrol car after you if you're not out by that time. Huge neighborhood. Gorgeous. I mean, drop your jaw on the floor. Holy crap, I'm home gorgeous. But that gate up at the front, what does that make all those streets inside that gate? And there are miles of them. It can take you 20 minutes to get from your house to the front gate in that neighborhood. Wow. There are miles. I think it's something like 17 miles of private roadways in that neighborhood. Just the street maintenance portion of their homeowners association dues is $4,200 a year. That doesn't count the rest of the HOAs. $4,200 per house per year just in street maintenance. So is it a big deal to have private roadways?
Yeah.
Yes. Do you think it's going to be important for you to disclose that we have private roadways out there?
Yes.
That part of owning this property is going to be maintaining this roadway. Because guess who ain't going to come scrape it when it snows? The DOT. You better hope your neighborhood has hired somebody to come scrape it, especially if you're in Governor's Club, because some of those streets are like this. Right? Of course, those people got enough money, they don't need to go to work when it snows. They just stay home. But it's a big deal. Now, here's the problem. You go in a new construction neighborhood, and the first thing the developer says is, oh, yeah, these are going to be public streets. Of course they are. Folks, there's a big difference between going to be and are. And that is where not only is it going to be important for you to do as a job in the real world, but important on the test for you to learn that distinction. There's a big difference between will be, gonna be, is gonna be, and they are public. Because what you have to disclose is the current status of the streets, right? Are they public or are they private right now? Now, should you go elaborate on that and say they're private right now, but the plan is to make them public? Yes. But you have to get in that private right now thing. Because here's how it works in the real world. Most developers, do they intend for their streets to be public or private? Public. Absolutely. The city or state has to come in and take these things over. Guess what condition they have to be in for the city to take them over? Perfect. Absolutely perfect. When the state of North Carolina or Raleigh or Cary comes in and looks at a new, now they may have potholes 8 feet deep on Capitol Boulevard, and that's okay. But they go look at a new construction subdivision to take over the streets, they will literally make them fix chips that are this big in the curbs. I've seen them do it. The other thing is, when the streets are private, have you ever been in a new construction neighborhood and noticed they just put pallets of grass right out on the street and park dump trucks out there and to be right out in the middle of the street cutting lumber and doing all? Can you do that if that's a public street? No. So is the city going to let them transfer over these streets until all that construction's done? No. You ever been into a new construction neighborhood and thought, why in the hell do they have all the drain pipes sticking up this far above the road, the curbs that far above the road, and you drive the whole way through the neighborhood? You know why that is? Because the developer knows they've got to come back and make it absolutely perfect and pretty for the city at the end of the thing, so they don't put the last coat of asphalt on until they're done, because they know all the big trucks are going to tear it up anyway. So they wait until they're completely finished, and they come back in and they put that last coat on. But here's the important part of that for you. If you sell a home in a neighborhood to somebody, and that neighborhood's still under construction, you've got to be very clear to that buyer. Look, the developer plans for these to be public streets, but right now they're still maintained by the developer. Here's what's hidden in that message. There's a chance that they may never get accepted as public streets, folks. And that's why you have to be careful to say that right now they're private. What happens if the developer goes out of business and never comes back in and puts that top coat of asphalt on? Is the city gonna take them over?
No.
No, and if the developer's out of business and gone and the city won't take them over, who's got to take over maintenance of this thing? The homeowners association. You ever heard of a special assessment? You're about to hear one. So do you see why that would be important to a buyer in that situation? To understand that there's some risk involved with purchasing in here. Now here's the great thing for you. 99 buyers out of 100 are going to hear that, read that, and go, okay, right? It's not like it's going to blow up your transaction, but it will blow up your life if you don't ever tell them about it. And then the one time out of 100 it happens that the thing doesn't become public. Well, again, who do they come out and try to blame? Us. You didn't tell me. You never told me. I didn't know they were private streets. So you got to do what? Disclose. Got to disclose what the current status of the streets is. Okay? Has everybody got that? I know I harped on that for a long time, but it's one agents screw up all the time. Here's a clue. If they're still building in the neighborhood, you disclose that the streets are private. If they're still building in that neighborhood, tell them these streets are most likely private. I will find out, and then go ask. And ask if the streets currently are public or private. Okay? So you make sure you're disclosing that correctly. That's like a red flag if they're still building in the neighborhood. Right? And no, you can't assume that because school buses go down those streets and you see city cops driving on those streets, that they already are public streets. They will use them even before that is the case. The mailman will still go down there and all that stuff when they're private. Okay?
The system is like a public-private?
No. No. People would like you to think there is.
I've seen like streets that's being taken care of by the city, but the community, the HOA.
Oh, they put up a sign that says private road, yeah. Good luck enforcing that in a court of law. And here's what will happen. If they ever get challenged in a court of law, if you catch the judge on a real bad day, the judge will go, you know what, you people, poor people, all this time, we thought you wanted the state maintaining your street. By all means, have it back. And he'll issue a judgment right there that says that's a private road. And they'll shit their pants on the way out of court when they realize how much money they just cost themselves. So no, there's no such thing as a public-private road. It's one or the other. You can't be a little bit pregnant, right? One or the other. All right? Okay. The Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act. We're out of subdivisions now. The Interstate Land Sales Disclosure Act is on page 116. This is something you might see on the national portion of the state license exam. Okay? Interstate means state to state, right? So this governs marketing of subdivisions across state lines. Now, when this law was written in 1968, marketing across state lines usually meant putting something in the mail, right? Or putting billboards up, or maybe taking out a television ad or a newspaper ad. Don't we pretty much market across state lines for everything now? We have this thing called the internet that kind of goes everywhere, right? So in general, you always have to comply with the Interstate Land Sales Disclosure Act because you're always marketing across state lines, all right? Now, it's for new construction subdivisions. It says if you're engaged in the sale or leasing of subdivision lots, that you have to file a statement of record if your subdivision is 25 or more lots. If you have fewer than 25 lots, you're exempt. Okay? It's on page 116. Fewer than 25 lots, you're exempt. So it's 25 or more lots. You have to file a statement with HUD. And this is only if you're selling lots in the subdivision. So if you're doing a resale, somebody comes to you and you want to resell, do you have to worry about this? No, this is new when you're selling the lots. Okay? If you're going to be selling these lots in a subdivision that has 25 or more properties, you've got to provide a property report. It's on 117 that says the things must be included in that property report. You can tell it was written a long time ago because it says distance over paved roads to nearby communities. Here's why this law exists, folks. A long time ago, the state of Florida in particular was a big swamp, right? In many ways it still is. But a long time ago, that was all that was there. Before the House of the Mouse and all that stuff in Orlando, there was nothing in the state of Florida except oranges and sunshine. And that's exactly how it was sold to people who were in the Northeast. And it was particularly sold that way during the winter. If you go look it up, there are whole communities down there that were built on these traveling shows that would go around the country. And they would take elephants and whole circuses and everything. And they would go have a room like this with people in it that would say, who wants to own land in Florida? If you want to own land in Florida, hold up a $10 bill. And they'd walk around and they'd grab your $10 bill and say, congratulations, you just bought a lot in Florida. That's literally how they sold it. Now, what they were selling was options on these properties, and you don't need to know any of this for the test, but I'm just giving you an idea of why these laws exist, right? And if somebody ever managed to make it down to Florida to see their lot, they'd take them out in a car to Weir Road in, and they'd say, yeah, your lot is right over there. Well, if you could see 25, 30, 40 miles over there, then that's where their lot was, right? So these people were making payments on these lots. Oh, I'm going to retire to Florida. And they make payments for 20 years, and they realize you got to have a helicopter to get in there to where it was. And so this Interstate Land Sales Disclosure Act was created to give people some idea of what they were actually buying. I'm really not kidding about it. That's exactly how many communities in Florida were developed. In the next chapter, when we talk about installment land contracts, that's what these things were. Sometimes they sold the same lot to 20, 30 different people. No, not a time share. An actual sale. All right? So you've got to tell them the distance over paved roads to nearby communities. You've got to tell them the number of homes currently occupied. Think about that. If you're selling all these lots and nobody lives down there, you're saying to somebody, hey, don't you want to retire to Florida? By the way, there's nobody that actually lives in any of these houses. It would probably decrease your odds of selling one, right? Okay. The soil conditions affecting the foundations, i.e. it's on a sinkhole, might be an important thing to know. There are a lot of those in Florida. Type of title you get and the existence of any liens. Okay. So again, it applies to subdivisions with 25 or more lots. Okay. And then new. You're selling the lots new, not resales of lots with homes.
If it's across state lines? So like I live in a relatively new development and there's like a big marshy land and they came and filled it in.
So they're not, if they were only marketing to people within the state, they would.
Lots.
Yep, if they're only marketing to people within the state, this doesn't apply. This is only when it's marketing across state lines and you have 25 or more lots.
So they don't have to ever tell that person that their lot was like the swamp lot and they came and put about 10 truckloads of dirt in it?
Correct. At least they're not subject to this law. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't other laws in North Carolina that would catch them, like failure to disclose material facts and all those kinds of things, right? There are laws that would prevent that within the state. But this is a national law that would govern any time you're advertising across state lines. It's really meant to protect the person who's, 3,000 miles away buying something sight unseen. That's what it's there for. Okay? We good on that? Everybody good on this? Key thing is how many lots? 25 or more. Okay? The other big thing here is you get that 7-day right of rescission. So in theory, I guess you got 7 days to go down to Florida and check out that lot and see if you really want it. You did get a free bag of oranges if you went down there and looked.
And some sunshine.
And some sunshine. All right. Building codes are also an example of public land use controls. These are set by the state and local municipalities. The primary purpose is safety. And we do come upon two things that you need to be familiar with here. The building permit and the certificate of occupancy. What's a building permit?
Like
That you want to build certain things.
Permit to do what?
Like anything they do to
Build something, change
Change
something,
it.
any change.
change it.
Do you know in North Carolina putting up a ceiling fan requires a permit legally?
Really? I didn't know
Ain't
that.
that insane?
And that's what's the blueprint.
You're changing the electrical system of the home. Don't go get a permit for that. Oh, I didn't say that. I wouldn't go get a permit for that. How about that? You should go get a permit for that. I like to live dangerously and put the other without permit. Okay? The purpose of a building permit is to indicate to your governing authority, your municipality, that you intend to make a change on this property. It's just notification to them that you intend to make this change, right? And that they approve in general of the plan for the change, right? Because part of getting a permit is telling them what you're going to change. Here's what I want to do. And they may require drawings, they may require blueprints, they may require a new plat map, depending on what it is that you're doing here. You know, because a permit could be for anything from building from the ground up to adding a deck, right? Putting in a hot water heater requires a permit.
And Clayton, they made me get a permit, when I opened my store. They just said, you know, you gotta get a permit. I said, I'm not doing anything, you still gotta get one.
Yeah.
So. it doesn't matter.
Because here's what the permit triggers. It triggers inspections. And that's what they really wanted you to have, was the inspections, right? So permits trigger inspections by that same authority, right? They come in and they inspect the progress. And then once you're finished and they've done all the inspections, they give you something called a certificate of occupancy. Now you might see that on an exam. A certificate of occupancy does not have anything to do with it being safe for human inhabitants or anything like that. A certificate of occupancy proves one thing: you complied with the building code process. You got a permit, you got the inspections, you passed the inspections. That's what the purpose of a certificate of occupancy is, to prove your compliance with the law.
With the building code.
With the building codes. And yes, if you don't get one, they can shut the work down, they can shut the building down. You can ask the owner of this building, he found out.
They wouldn't give me a license without it. They're like,
When we were moving in, when we were moving the real estate school here, when we had outgrown our space on Creedmoor Road, the owner agreed to do some upfit. That's a word in commercial real estate that means they are changing the property to suit your needs. That's what upfit means. And part of that upfit was putting up a couple walls. One of which being that one behind those folks there, that this used to be open to that, what is now the student lounge. It was all one big room back there. If you notice, when you go into the student lounge, there's like a shelf in the back corner. It suspiciously matches this one that's in here, because it all used to be one big thing and that wall wasn't there. And I wanted it divided off so we could have a student lounge which served all 3 classrooms versus just the one. So that wall was one of those things. Well, I'm not going to say what he is. This nice gentleman could not get permits for any of that, which is not my concern because it's his building. All I want is the wall, right? He didn't get permits, and he has them put up a wall made of wood. Well, guess what? You can't use wood walls in a commercial space. It has to be metal. Well, the city of Raleigh happened to be doing spot inspections, and they cruise through the parking lot, and they see the trucks, of course, out there, and they look on file, and they don't see any building permits, so they come in to see what is going on. And the city inspector comes in, he sees them building the wall, he sees that it's not been permitted, he gets on a ladder, he looks up there, and he sees that the wall is made of wood, and he says, "You nice gentlemen need to stop what you're doing, because I'm about to put a big red sticker on the front of this building that says it cannot be occupied." And he shut it down. The whole building, including the businesses upstairs.
wow.
Thankfully, it wasn't me in here because I'd have been going crazy, right? But that's what not complying with the building code process can get you, especially in a commercial facility, okay? Now, this is a big deal if you don't comply with the process even in a residential setting. We talk all the time about selling properties where space is unpermitted, right?
There's one on Realtor.com in Raleigh right now. I wanted to show you guys.
There's always properties out there where somebody's finished a basement without a permit, or finished the whole second story of the house without a permit. Now, Can you sell something legally that's unpermitted? Absolutely. There is no law saying you cannot sell it if it's unpermitted. As a buyer, you should understand there are big risks associated with purchasing something that has unpermitted finished space. Number one, you may think you have insurance, but you very likely do not. Because I can assure you, if a fire happens to start in that unpermitted space, the insurance company will say, you know what, we can't guarantee that that work was done in a safe manner. We're not insuring it. Your house is burned down and you don't get anything. That's a big risk, wouldn't you say? Imagine you have a plumbing pipe bust and it happens to be in that unpermitted space. They're going to come in and say, oh, we can't control that. It was not permitted. We don't insure things that are unpermitted. That's a big problem. So the insurance thing is a big problem. The resale thing is going to be a big problem because the next buyer is going to have the same concerns, right? So yes, you can sell property with unpermitted space, but it's what should you do? What's our favorite D word? Disclose. Disclose, disclose, disclose. Make sure they know that they're buying unpermitted space. What's a good hint that they're buying unpermitted space? How do you find out that it's unpermitted?
Look on the tax record and it's not the same size.
Yeah, look on the tax record. If the tax record says it's 1,600 square feet and the listing says it's 2,200 square feet, Houston, we have a problem. Something is wrong. Because it would not be that big of a discrepancy. Okay?
What about like a screen porch? Because that would not be included in the.
It wouldn't be included in the living area, so here's a good way to look up that. When you write an offer on something, you've got to pull up the property tax card because you need the legal description. Right? Remember we talked about getting a legal description to put on the contract? Well, you're going to get that from the property tax records. Also, in those property tax records, there's going to be a drawing, a sketch of the building. And if you look at the sketch and it shows a deck, and you look at the house and there's a screen porch there, it's probably an unpermitted screen porch. And yes, you would need to disclose that. At that point, what I would do is ask the sellers, is the screen porch permit? And they're going to go, I don't know.
Yeah.
And you're going to go to the city and try to find the permit, and they're not going to have it because they throw them away as soon as they want the money. They burn them after 3 weeks, I think, or whatever they do with them. They're just very hard to find after the fact. But what you would need to disclose is, we don't know the status of the permitting on the screen porch. It's not shown in the tax records. Sellers have no knowledge. So you've disclosed what you know, right? What you reasonably can find out about the status of that. It is possible to get things permitted after the fact. That's largely going to depend on your municipality and what kind of mood they're in that day. Apex is terrible, horrible. I mean, their response is tear it down and rebuild it, and we'll permit it after you rebuild it. I mean, that's literally what their response. Even a deck that they can look under, they'll say, oh, no, we can't see the way it's constructed. You're going to have to take that down. Carrie is surprisingly easy to work with. Carrie actually has a machine that can look inside the walls of the plumbing.
Oh, cool.
Because one of the classic things is somebody's finished a room, and they come in and say, well, we can't inspect the plumbing and electrical because we can't see behind the sheetrock, so you got to take all the sheetrock down. That's the classic response. Carrie actually has a machine. I think they charge you like $1,000 for them to come out and use it, but that's a lot cheaper than taking all the sheetrock down. And they can actually scan the walls and get visual images to see that the electrical and plumbing is done correctly.
Oh, Raleigh.
Raleigh's sort of middle of the road. Depends on who you get and what, who you get and what mood they're in that day.
Do they have a nice machine?
They do not have one of those that I know about. Yeah. Okay? So it's a material fact, which means you have to disclose it if we have this unpermitted space. All right? Flood hazard regulations. Again, this is a land use control. Basically, the federal government, through FEMA, draws flood maps and designates certain properties as being in flood hazard areas. If your property is located in a flood hazard area, it is a big deal to disclose that. The reason it's a big deal to disclose that is if they get a loan on that property, they're going to be required to maintain flood insurance, and flood insurance is expensive. And you
They
can
don't
only.
give you anything if you
I'm sorry?
need it. And if you flood, they don't give you much.
Well, if you don't have it and you flood, you don't get anything.
Yeah, but
Then half the
not
time,
have it.
FEMA's designated as an area, people who didn't carry flood insurance still get stuff.
Yeah,
That's what happened
sometimes.
to my money.
Right. Sometimes. That's true. But yes, if you are in a designated flood hazard area, you will be required to maintain flood insurance. You can only buy it from one place, the people who said you were in the flood hazard area, the federal government. Private insurers do not sell it. Okay? You can look up your property to see if it's in a flood hazard area. Any property your clients are interested in, you can look them up to see if they are in a flood hazard area. Just go on FEMA.gov and type in the address, and it'll show you.
Are there flood hazard areas in Wayne County?
Yes. Yeah. Usually things that back up the stream. I mean, everything along down here by Crabtree Valley Mall. I mean, Crabtree Valley Mall floods if it clouds up.
Yeah, the
So
parking lot floods all the time.
all the time. I mean, they all the time putting sandbags outside the doors of Crabtree. So all those properties around Crabtree are in flood hazard areas. All right. Highway access, obviously, you have to have access to a roadway. We've talked about that, so you need to make sure that is the case. Okay. Let's see here. We're not going to talk about the ADA right now. We'll talk about it in chapter 20. Last thing in this chapter, private land use controls. Covenants. Whole chapter about public ones. Now we got one page about private ones. These are covenants. Subdivision covenants, restrictive covenants. Here's what you need to know about them. They are enforced by other property owners. What if the HOA won't take action? Are you dead in the water?
No.
No. How many other owners have to file suit in order to enforce these covenants? One. That's it. All it takes is one. I hear people all the time, my covenants say people can't park in the street. My HOA lets them do it all the time. Well, enforce it yourself. All it takes is one. One owner in that same subdivision can enforce the covenants. How do you do that? You file a lawsuit. Same way you settle any other private dispute. You go file a lawsuit.
What if you have a management company running your insurance?
Then
Same difference.
you would call them, and if they refuse to enforce it, you could still go that route of enforcing yourself.
Would you file a lawsuit on them?
That would be a question for an attorney. But to stop the use, you would file a lawsuit against the person who was offending. Okay? These are appurtenant, which means they're permanent. They transfer with the property. Okay? They can be for any restriction that is not illegal. And folks, there are some crazy ones. There's one neighborhood here in Raleigh that has a covenant about how long your garage door can be open.
Yeah.
10 minutes.
Really?
10 minutes. The garage door cannot be open for longer than 10 minutes.
Do they enforce that then?
I don't know, because I would run from a neighborhood that even had that kind of a covenant.
Probably someone who lives in that neighborhood that rides around.
Probably.
Probably retired.
Yeah.
So yes, they do have a covenant. So it can be for any restriction that's not illegal. Now, here's the important test question you might get. The covenants say I cannot have a chain link fence. Covenants are private restrictions, right?
Mm-hmm.
The zoning, public restrictions say I can have a chain link fence. Which is it? Can I have it? Which do I follow? The covenants or the zoning? Why the covenants?
Because you agreed to it, signed it, you signed it.
Let's say, flip it around. The covenants say I can have a chain link fence, and the zoning says I cannot. Which one is it? There's the answer. Whichever one is what? Say that again for us. Stricter. You always follow the most strict one. There is no rule for covenants trump zoning or zoning trumps covenants. Whichever one is more strict is the one you follow. Most of the time, the more strict one's going to be the covenants. Most of the time.
So the answer would be zoning?
No, the answer would be whichever is more strict.
Which would be covenant.
In that example,
Yeah.
in the first example, that would be the covenants, correct?
Yeah.
In the second example, it would be zoning. It's whichever's more strict. Whichever one said you couldn't have it, that'd be the one you'd have to follow. Already talked about all that. And that is it for chapter 6. Break time.